So, a lot like with the initial video, I initially wasn't planning to make this video, but every single time one of these things happens, I would check the social medias just to see what's going on and to see what people are talking about with the issue itself. And again, with this one, it does feel like some people seem to be misunderstanding what is happening and what has actually happened and the actual outcome and how it impacts them. And as someone who has worked in the Japanese game industry for more than 10 years and who has also worked within the eroge, the adult visual novel scene for a few years during his time, I do feel like this is something that is a little more close to my heart in a way, so I figured I might as well talk about it with some of that in mind. But for those of you who do not know what happened, basically more than a month ago on the 19th of May, Fantia, which is like a Japanese equivalent for Patreon, which allows for some adult content on it, announced a change to the guideline. If you're interested in that, I made a video talking about it before. You should probably watch that one first, since this is more of an update video as to everything that's happened since then. But basically on the 19th that happened, and then on the 20th, they put out a secondary clarification that the rules won't immediately result in bannings, and instead they would kind of first warn people about the content that infringes on the guidelines, and then they'll take it from there and only ban when it feels like they are dealing with repeat offenders. So the reason why this became an issue at the time especially was because of the fact that the guideline changes would retroactively impact content already on the website. So if you were someone who had worked and created content on the website for more than, like, let's say 10 years, you would need to retroactively potentially go back and censor all of your content, and you have to do that within 7 days. And so, needless to say, many creators were kind of panicked by the whole thing, and many of them actually left the website in wake of what had happened. This basically carried on for a good 9 days, after which, on the 29th of May, they finally put out another announcement stating that they had noticed what was going on and that they would actually reconsider the guideline changes and how best to implement it, especially when it comes to specifically 2D content. Although even at the time they did kind of say that they would only really reconsider it for 2D content and not so much for 3D content. That is to say, like IRL people like you and me, not 3D in the sense of like 3D models and the like. At this point, it already confirmed, at least for me, that the issue at hand really wasn't a issue of the credit card companies and was more so to do with the whole idea of Criminal Code 175, which I did mention in the previous video as well. And that whatever group was pushing for this type of censorship to be implemented on the platform was basically using the 3D IRL content on the site as a catalyst to basically target everything potentially. The reason why at the time I also didn't feel like it was an issue with the credit card company specifically is because of the fact that on Fantia you already can't use Visa and MasterCard. Like, those have not been usable for the longest of times. In terms of credit cards, you can actually only use a JCB card or American Express, which is kind of funny that that one specifically is still actually usable, considering the fact that for some other sites previously they pulled out as well. But basically, yeah, some of the things that I was suspecting and that people were talking about within the Japanese space at the very least, those suspicions were to some extent confirmed as a result of this. However, after the announcement on the 29th of May, they basically just went quiet and didn't say anything else about the situation at hand. So there was a part of me that at the time was suspecting that perhaps they were just gonna put out this announcement and then hopefully just sweep it all under the rug and just pretend nothing happened, and all of the censorship that they were talking about implementing would just actually not happen instead. However, on the 25th of June around like 3 p.m.ish was when I got the email from them. They basically put out an announcement both on their website as well as sent a blanket email to everyone who has ever created a account with them. So not just the creators specifically, because I don't have any sussy feed pictures on there or anything either, although it would seem that I might have to censor those even harder if I did have those. Throughout both of these documents, they basically confirmed that the entire issue did indeed stem from Criminal Code 175. So whichever group tried to clamp down on them basically used the criminal code as the basis to report the site, and it was because of the vague laws within the criminal code that they had to implement these forms of censorship instead. And they have also confirmed that the guideline changes will not apply to 2D content. However, it would still go according to the initial plan when it comes to 3D, as in IRL content instead. So basically, to put it very simply, artists will not have to make the change, but if you were a cosplayer or someone who made videos or anything of the sort that involved real people within the content itself, If for some reason you had content that was considered to be obscene, you would have to censor it according to the new censorship guidelines. And personally for me, this kind of left me with fairly mixed feelings about the whole issue, because on the one hand, it's kind of great that it didn't apply to 2D content in the end. However, the fact that it's still being implemented on 3D content, even through all the pushback, does mean that to some extent, the people that actually caused this entire issue in the first place, that reported the website to the police and that created this entire issue, still kind of got their way in the end. Because in the end, even though this has been only applied to 3D content, this doesn't actually do anything to improve anything for anyone at all. Because remember, it's not like the guideline changes actually increase the amount of content that has to be censored. It just increased the amount of censorship on pre-existing content. So in terms of things like protecting the kids, this doesn't really do anything in the first place, because most of this is adult content. You need to be verified to enter it in the first place. And more importantly, you can't access the content without getting a membership or supporting the creator to begin with. So unless you specifically had a JCB or American Express credit card, you had no access to this content. And when it comes to things such as potential exploitation of the people who are within it, right? Like the fact that potentially people might get forced into, doing obscene stuff, and then that stuff is getting censored and being put on the website to earn money. The censorship laws don't actually change that either, because if we are to believe Fantia's own words, all they're doing is bringing the level of censorship up to the industry standard, which the industry standard to begin with is very vague. Like different companies across like the different forms of media, when it comes to the interpretation of Criminal Code 175, actually deal with it in very different ways. Like the creators of Koihime Muso or Basin, they are one of the few companies that would actually completely bleep out the Japanese words used for genitalia in general within their visual novels. And that's something that most visual novel companies don't do either. So to begin with, it's always been very questionable where the line even lies. And if what they're saying is true, then this really doesn't do anything to prevent any form of future exploitation either. So like realistically, this does not do anything to protect anyone from anything whatsoever. So the fact that this got through is still a net negative. And I understand what some people might say, right? Like, yeah, can't we just be happy about the fact that 2D content isn't hit by all of this, right? This is a win. We should be happy that we won, and like all of this didn't happen. And frankly, hopefully this doesn't come off as rude, right? I'm not trying to insult you or like make fun of you or anything like that. But seeing this as a win is fairly short-sighted in my opinion, because while it is a positive that it didn't happen to 2D content specifically, and perhaps you could say that that might be worth celebrating in and of itself, the issues itself, the core issue still hasn't really gone away, because the main catalyst for the entire issue to begin with was to target the 3D content, and that still did get hit by the regulations in the end. While the 2D content didn't get hit by all of this, if you want to truly believe that all of this is being done by activist organizations that want to censor everything, they kind of still did succeed on their initial goal. So realistically, all this means is just that they didn't manage to hit everything at once at this point. However, this does mean that the foot is still through the door in terms of increasing censorship overall. And this still can lead to issues in the future if all the pushback stops now, because everybody thinks that the issue is over, instead of seeing it as like, you could celebrate the fact that it didn't hit 2D content, but the fact that it hit 3D content means that there still needs to be pushback against all of this still. Because now that they have actually gotten the censorship in on 3D content as an IRL content, nothing is really stopping them from in the future then pushing again and trying to do the same thing for photorealistic content, because of the fact that it looks way too much like a real human. And then if they actually manage to get their way with that, all they really need to do is just continue to turn the dial on what is considered photorealistic, what resembles a human enough, and bit by bit it could still lead to the type of censorship that could potentially still hit 2D content in the future. And I get it that all of this might sound like a bit of a slippery slope argument, but fact of the matter is that if we look back at the past like 30 years of censorship history in Japan, or if you wanted to, you could look back at the past 40 to 50 years. It's always kind of been like this, where there's always been a fairly large push at some point for fairly big blanket censorship. The eventual outcome is that some level of censorship still happens, but it is lower than expected. And then you basically see a slow boil over the last 30 years, where bit by bit, as more censorship has come into place, more and more things are actually not permissible, both within the anime as well as the manga industry as well as games, right? We have seen it happen with the harmful comic panic within the 90s and how that led to a mass axing of many manga series at the time. Granted, for the most part, the big titles that everybody knows, like Dragon Ball, for example, didn't get hit, but there were many series that were axed during that period, and a lot of content that was permissible in the 90s is no longer permissible in many of the big manga publications today. And the same can be said for visual novels, for example, the adult game industry as well, where every 10 years or so you would basically see some kind of government intervention, whether directly or indirectly, that would basically cause a panic within the industry and cause more regulations to be set by the companies within the industry themselves, basically trying to self-regulate so the government does not directly intervene to set a law. And every 10 years, you see them adding more and more things. First, it began with regulations such as setting up the software itself, which, at the time you could say was probably a good thing because of the fact that it helped to basically regulate the content to ensure that proper logistics channels exist for the industry so that companies can basically better ensure that their content does not accidentally reach children. And then over the years, you start to see more and more forms of regulations by the sovereign on the types of content that you can have in visual novels as well. So bit by bit, there's always that increase in the amount of censorship that exists, right? It's a slow boil that has slowly increased over time because of the fact that everybody expects, because of the situation at hand, censorship to go up to 10. But it only goes up to like maybe 1 or 2. And so many people just look at that and think that, oh, it's a win, we managed to push back against most of it. But then every 10 years or so this happens, and bit by bit we're starting to see that stacks up and things get more and more regulated over time nonetheless. Which is why I'm saying that for people who think this is a win, this isn't actually a win because of the fact that the main issue at hand didn't get resolved in a way that would be positive for everyone. It just kind of ended up being a slow boil instead of a very massive censorship instead. That's it though, to be honest. I don't know if there's anything that can be further done other than just screaming at clouds. Part of the reason why I stopped making videos consistently on this topic as well is because, there's that sense of pessimism that settles in over time and you see things slowly like boiling up in this way, and there being not much that people can actually do about it. And then there's all the noise of all the things that people seem to be getting wrong with the situation, which hopefully this helps to like make some of that a little clearer as well. But yeah, especially with all the stuff going on IRL in like the last year plus as well, it makes it a lot harder to want to like be on the grind trying to make this type of videos and getting them out exactly on time. So didn't really do that. As is, I still kind of had to deal in the last few years as well with like some of Steam's very restrictive stances, especially when it comes to Japanese anime aesthetic style game content as well. But of course, they would never tell you that whenever you apply to get your game on the website, they would just like stealthily reject your game if they feel that it's not up to their standards, and you kind of have to play a guessing game trying to figure out what even is the issue to begin with. But yeah, that's just me going off on a tangent. All I really wanted to say with all of this is, if you're one of those people who has been supporting any forms of like push or any forms of like putting pressure, with like the whole like thing on Fantia, for example, or with like the petitions and all of that do exist within Japan as well. This thing happening isn't exactly the win to the level that people think that it is. And if the momentum stops here just because of the fact that like people think that the whole thing has blown over, it is still an pre-existing issue that may continue to cause more problems in the future if people stop pushing back against these forms of censorship overall, is all I really wanted to say with this. That's all I have for you guys for today. Thank you all for watching, and yeah, thank you to the people who usually help to support the channel. Thanks to you guys that well, maybe not so much for this video specifically, since I'm just like ranting in front of a camera talking about a current event-ish thing that doesn't really require as much like monetary support to do. Like this is like fairly low effort in comparison, I would think, to some of the other stuff we do on the channel. But it helps to like create the other forms of content that I do enjoy creating a lot more as well. So thank you all for the support. Thank you all to the people who watch as well. It's all thanks to all of your support after all that I keep on making videos in general as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in a different video, which is probably gonna be on something very different, since it does seem for the most part that this issue has resolved itself, unless something massive blows up again instead. Which if it does, I guess we might need to talk about it. But that's it. Until then, take care and bye-bye.